What's up guys, Lifting here. This is a guide for my Caustic Arrow Occultist build I played not long ago. The intention of the build was to try and make Caustic Arrow feel good not only as a map clear skill, but also as a single target skill, something Caustic Arrow otherwise have had a notoriously bad reputation for. That said, I think I managed it, and the build has turned out nicely both defensively and offensively, with great clear potential and good single target damage. The build is played as an Occultist due to the potent chaos damage buffs, but also because of the amazing defensive layers provided via Wicked Ward and Vile Bastion. In 3.6 Energy Shield is king, and so to fully utilize that we go Chaos Inoculation with this build. This makes our character immune to chaos damage, but also limits maximum health to 1. For that reason, Energy Shield is used instead of life to scale our survivability, and with a few crafts and the Soul Strike Quiver in hand, we reach some crazy fast Energy Shield recharge, potentially making it feel very tanky overall. So Caustic Arrow is a bow skill, as the name may imply. It consists of 2 damage components, the first of these being the projectile and the second part the Caustic Cloud, which is the one that delivers the damage over time effect to the skill and the one that we are focusing around. The cloud itself is scaled via chaos, projectile, AoE and damage over time modifiers, and in big part levels, and by that I mean levels of the gem. As you may know, the soft cap gem leveling path of Exile is 20, but in this setup you eventually end up with a level 24 to 28 Caustic Arrow skill depending on your budget. And speaking of which, the build can be played on a rather forgiving budget all the way up to end-tier maps. But as with most builds, the more you invest, the stronger it becomes. Fortunately, the amount you would have to invest to get it to the point where I took this build is comparatively still rather modest. A rough estimate puts this build around 5 to 6 Exalted Orbs. However, prices of course vary, and I wouldn't put too much thought into this. And as I said, the build can be done on a complete budget without any of those investments, all the way up to end-tier maps. With this setup, I've done everything in the game, including Uber Elder. Let's talk about the gear requirements. To make this work, you will need a Soul Strike Quiver, the Void Walker boots, the Baited Breath belt, the Witchfire Brew, and 3 to 4 jewels with the affix, faster start of Energy Shield recharge. The Soul Strike Quiver is what allows us, together with the jewels, to reach such fast Energy Shield recharge. And let me explain this real quick to those of you guys out there who are unfamiliar with the mechanic. When you take damage, you lose Energy Shield, just like you would lose life. But unlike life, Energy Shield will start to recharge after 2 seconds until it reaches full or until you take damage again. With the Soul Strike Quiver and the jewels, we can effectively shorten this period down to 0.82, more than halving the duration, meaning our recharge is going to kick in very quickly after taking damage. Now this may not sound like much, but it makes a huge difference when combined with the Wicked Ward Ascendancy node that allows Energy Shield recharge to ignore incoming damage as long as the recharge started recently. In practice, this means that when you take damage with this build, you will after a very short duration start recharging Energy Shield, and that effect won't stop even if you take damage or reach full. This is incredibly powerful, but actions speak louder than words, so let me do a demonstration. What you see here is the build against Argus in the Uber Lab, an otherwise rather dangerous enemy to face tank. As you can see, after the first hit, we shortly thereafter begin to recharge our Energy Shield, and we are able to regenerate through his damage. And this of course translates to all encounters in the game, making this interaction between the faster start of Energy Shield recharge modifiers and the Wicked Ward node amongst the absolute best defensive mechanics in the game. That's not to say you can't die, and there will be encounters where you get absolutely swarmed, and even with a very fast start of recharge you will be receiving so many frequent hits that you will be unable to start the recharge uninterrupted. Fortunately, there is an answer to that too, and that is Vault Discipline and our Grace Aura. Vault Discipline completely ignores recharge interrupts from outside damage for a short duration and allows our recharge to kick in spite of it. So when you get swarmed, you simply pop this, and unless something literally one-shots you, it is highly unlikely that you will die. We also use the Vault Discipline as a way of mitigating bleed and burn damage, as this gives us more freedom in regards to which flasks we want to use. Then there's Grace. We use that as a way of getting enough evasion to effectively evade approximately every third attack. Evading attacks means Energy Shield recharge won't get interrupted, and it can thus start its recharge process. And so that is why the combination of the Occultist, Evasion, Vaal Discipline, Soul Strike is such an immensely powerful defensive mechanic currently in the game. So now that we got that covered, let's talk about the other items I recommend. The Voidwalker boots are mainly used for the pierce effect they provide. When you pierce with Caustic Arrow, you leave multiple clouds for each enemy pierced by the projectile. Now the cloud damage does not overlap, but it effectively and efficiently increases the area of effect, allowing you to cover a bigger area in clouds, killing more enemies with less projectiles. These boots also come with a welcomed amount of dexterity, making it easier to reach the attribute requirements of your gear and dexterity skills. Not to mention your character will constantly be entering facing, which basically allows you to pass directly through monsters without them being able to block you. A minor but very useful mechanic once you get used to it. One of the downsides to using the Soul Strike quiver is that despite it allowing your energy shield recharge to start quicker, it also makes the recharge rate slower. To fix that, we use the Baited Breath belt. Using this grants 50% increased energy shield recharge rate, basically overriding the 40% reduction that Soul Strike gives, while at the same time providing very useful bonuses and increases to our maximum energy shield and a slight damage increase too. Finally, the last recommendation is the Witchfire Brew Flask. This flask provides a huge damage increase by cursing nearby enemies with Despair, a curse that makes enemies take more damage from damage over time effects such as our Caustic Cloud, and it also reduces their chaos resistances, further increasing the amount of damage they take. Then on top of this, the flask itself has an extra modifier that increases damage over time effects on top of what the Despair curse provides. So overall, a lot of bang for your buck here. Now this is of course only when the flask is active, but at 20% quality each use will grant you 6 seconds of effect, giving you more than enough time to deal with pretty much anything besides the very end game bosses of course. During those encounters you will have to rely on getting the flasks refilled during the ad phases, or simply throw in a Despair curse for you to self-cast in between, or go back to town and refill. Oh, and another thing is of course also that the Witchfire Brew Flask also adds another defensive layer by blinding nearby enemies and scaling our evasion rating, making us harder to hit, which provides great synergy to our energy shield recharge mechanic by making it harder for enemies to interrupt it from happening. The only other unique I use, which is by no means a requirement, is a Watcher's Eye duel with the Discipline affix that allows for faster start of energy shield recharge too. In my case, with it providing 40% faster start of recharge, it takes the 0.82 to 0.71 seconds before the recharge starts. So as you can see, it's nothing crazy and definitely not required. And it's completely fine to just use another regular duel with faster start to recharge and other useful modifiers instead. Another thing to keep an eye out for if you want to get a Watcher's Eye is to get the one that blinds attacking enemies while Grace is active. But as I said, the Watcher's Eye can be very expensive, so if your budget is limited, just ignore this. Now let's talk about skill gems. And you can see the various setups I've set up in Path of Building, but let me explain the less obvious ones. For Caustic Arrow, you have a budget setup and an expensive setup. The budget setup is linked to damage on full life, vicious projectiles, swift affliction, void manipulation, and then either concentrated effect or increased area of effect, depending on whether you are mapping or bossing, with concentrated effect of course being the gem you add in for bosses and increased area of effect for mapping. The more expensive setup is very similar with the exception of using a level 4 Empower instead of void manipulation. This setup provides almost 100,000 extra dot DPS as it allows your Caustic Arrow with this setup to reach level 28. That said, I've done all the content in the game on the budget setup, and it is in no way necessary to use the expensive version, but for you guys who want to squeeze the absolute most out of the build, then it does make a notable difference in terms of DPS. We also incorporate a Vaal Blight setup for our build. By itself it deals a decent amount of damage and can quickly dispose of enemies surrounding your character. But the primary reason for Vaal Blight is due to its ability to increase damage taken dealt by other sources of chaos damage, in this case Caustic Arrow. For this setup we link Vaal Blight with Controlled Destruction, Void Manipulation and Efficacy. Swift Affliction will give you slightly more damage over Void Manipulation, but will also shorten the duration of the debuff, and we're not interested in that. If you prefer a longer effect of Vaal Blight, you can even take out Void Manipulation and use increased duration too, at the cost of losing some damage. The way I typically use Vault Blight is when I encounter a very tanky enemy and I want to increase the damage my Caustic Arrow deals against that target. Or if I'm completely surrounded by enemies and I won't be able to hit them all with my Caustic Cloud, then Vault Blight's 360 mechanic is a great way of clearing those two. To be able to run all of the auras, I've linked Vault Discipline, Grace and Clarity to a level 3 Enlighten and kept Clarity at level 8 to prevent it from taking up too much mana. Alternatively, you can simply leave out Clarity entirely and you won't need the Enlighten. This will save you some currency, however this way the mana regen feels a little better, but it really isn't that important. You decide. Besides this, I use Flame Dash for mobility and I have a cast when damage taken set up to proc Immortal Call and summon my Flame Golem for me. Alright, so for the skill tree. The nodes we're interested in for this type of build are nodes that scale Energy Shield, a few Jewel sockets, and then scaling the damage via Projectile, Chaos, Damage over time, Minion and Area damage nodes. The reason Minion damage nodes work for our build is because we pick up the Spiritual Aid notable, which enables Minion damage modifiers to also affect us. On a similar note, we also pick up the Spiritual Command notable, which enables Minion attack speed nodes to affect our character. Now the biggest challenge you will run into with this build is figuring out when the best time to switch over to Chaos Inoculation is. And while I would love to give you a direct, clear answer to this, it's more of a it depends type of situation. However, as a rule of thumb, I suggest you have at least 3500 Energy Shield, the Wicked Ward Keystone and Vault Discipline before you make the switch. I would also wait until level 69, as it is at that level some of the better Energy Shield bases become available. To make it easy for yourself, you could simply farm the Blood Aqueducts until you reach level 69 and then do a bit of the gearing from there. Before you make the switch, you also need to make sure you have your new flasks ready and set up, as life flasks will be unnecessary from here on. Another thing to note is that when you switch to CI, you may notice you get stunned a lot. That is a downside to only having one maximum life. However, as soon as you get the Vile Bastion Keystone, that won't be an issue anymore. If you want, you can until then grab the Eye of Chayula amulet, which will make you stun immune, and then replace it once you unlock the Vile Bastion Keystone, if you haven't at that time already. Until you make the transition, I also highly recommend you pick up enough life nodes so that you feel relatively safe, which of course also means getting enough life rolls on your pre-CI gear so you can probably scale it. Keep in mind, you can use the Orbs of Regret to respec a point or use one of the 18 free respec points you get via the various quests in the game. In the path of building, I've made 3 leveling or progression trees, in case you want to see which route I recommend you take when spending your skill points as you level. Just keep in mind that some of these points are getting respec'd for the final tree. To get enough Energy Shield for your build to go CI, the most important factor is going to be your chest armor and helmet. Via these you can get some fairly high Energy Shield rolls. I recommend aiming for at least 550 Energy Shield on your chest and 220 on your helmet. Besides that, you of course need to get as high Energy Shield rolls on every other piece of rare equipment to the extent of what your budget makes possible. Remember that without the flat amount of Energy Shield provided from your gear, your skill nodes won't have anything to properly scale, and they thus become largely ineffective. They are, after all, percentage based, and 500% of 0 is still 0, right? So make sure you get as much flat Energy Shield on all your rare gear as you possibly can. But keep in mind, you obviously don't need to get the best rolls to begin with. You can over time upgrade as you make room for it in your budget. Now that we're talking about rare gear, there is a few crafting mods I recommend you try and get on your gear. On your gloves, if possible, try and craft the minion damage prefix, as we are able to scale that due to the Spiritual Aid notable. On your amulet, you can get the increased area of effect and damage suffix. And finally, on your rings, look for the faster start of Energy Shield recharge mod. These mods come in different tiers and start out cheap, but especially the ring crafts can get expensive at their highest value. But don't worry if you can't afford the top rolls in the beginning, just stick with the cheaper ones until you can. Another thing I recommend in regards to your rings is to get 2 stone rings, preferably of item level 84 or above, but as long as they are above item level 72, then that is okay too. The only difference is the tier of resistances that they will be able to roll, with the item level 84 ones being able to roll tier 1, and above 72 then you can get tier 2 resistance rolls. Once you have those rings, grab yourself a bunch of envy essences of either tier 1, 2 or 3 depending on your budget, and use these to roll yourself a pair of rings with increased chaos damage, proper resistances, and or maybe even some energy shield too. Then make sure it has at least one prefix open so you eventually can add the faster start of energy shield recharge mod onto it. The rings are the most expensive part of this build if we exclude the Watcher's Eye, but they also provide amazing functionality, and I highly recommend you take the time to craft yourself a proper pair of good rings like this. At any time, feel free to check the path of building to see which affixes and rolls I have on my gear and use that as a guideline. As I said, it's completely fine if you have to lower the rolls to be able to afford it. You can always upgrade later. That's what the game is about. You slowly scale and improve your character. After all, what would the fun be if you could get all the good stuff from the get-go? Finally, let me give you some leveling tips. If possible, get yourself a 4-linked silver branch bow and a Heris Ire for the first 35 levels, and make sure you link your Caustic Arrow setup in the bow to get +1 to gem levels. Once you reach level 36, upgrade or buy the silver bow bow, and if possible, get it 5-linked. The easiest way of doing that is to buy the Jeweler's Touch Prophecy and then spend a Jeweler's Orb on the bow, and it now has 5 links. If you can't afford that, then just stick to it being 4-linked for now. Other than that, the standard leveling items such as the Wanderlust Boots, Gold Rim Helmet, Nocturnal Caress Gloves, and the Wicked Ward Amulet are all great early level choices and can often be acquired for very cheap. And don't be afraid to change these out with the rare gear if the rare gear have the right affixes we talked about earlier. Caustic Arrow starts off a bit slow, but eventually becomes a very satisfying build to play when properly scaled. The final topic I want to cover is the endgame bow crafting you eventually have to do at some point. For high tier content, you will want a bow with the affixes +1 to level of socketed gems, +2 to level of socketed bow gems, and the non-ailment chaos damage over time multiplier rolls. In the past, these used to be rather expensive to obtain, but fortunately fossil crafting has made this very easy and relatively cheap. Here's how you do it. First, get yourself a 6-linked short, grove or thicket bow of at least item level 64, but not higher than 82. This is important as this will allow you to roll the necessary mods and avoid the flat chaos damage to attack rolls, which you don't need for this setup. Then get yourself a powerful chaotic resonator and add in a metallic, corroded and prismatic fossil. This combination of mods will ensure a high probability of you rolling the level mods on the bow. You may not get it the first few attempts, but relatively speaking it is rather easy to get. I personally rolled my bow 5 times, and during that I got the level mods 3 times. Unfortunately, these had no free prefix, and I wanted to be able to add the chaos damage multiplier roll via master crafting too, so I had to spend 5 resonators and its relevant fossils until I got it, but overall it was very cheap to get the rolls. The most expensive part of this is getting the 6-link bow with the right item level, but comparatively even that wasn't too bad. I paid around 1.5 Exalt for a white grove bow and crafted it from there. Overall, I really like the viability of Caustic Arrow in the current state of the game, especially when played as the Occultist for the added safety, damage and streamlining it provides. The build can take you from level 1 and all the way through into the highest and most challenging content, and if you like dot builds, then I think you will end up liking this too. I hope you guys like the guide. Refer to the path of building for updates for future patches. Remember to subscribe and ring that bell icon. A very big thank you to you guys over at Patreon for your support. You make a big difference. Thank you for watching, and bros, do you even nerd?